This podcast is brought to you by Boyle Sports. Place five £5 Accas and get a sixth one free with Acca Loyalty on the Boyle Sports betting app. Boyle Sports. This is betting. Terms and conditions apply. Offer applies to mobile bets only. 18 plus. Bet responsibly. BeGambleAware.co.uk.
Hello and welcome back to Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan, and in this episode, we're looking at one of our sport's most valued supporters. We're all excited to see some British Speedway getting back underway once again. The speed and the danger are some of the aspects that make the sport so thrilling to watch. 500cc bikes with no brakes hurtling into corners at 70 miles per hour is a fantastic spectacle. But what happens when Speedway goes wrong? Riders know full well the risks they're taking in their careers, and for our enjoyment, accidents in Speedway will always happen. But thanks to better safety equipment for riders and air fences, these are often relatively minor. However, unfortunately, heading into this season, there will be some riders who don't know it yet, but will find themselves injured and sidelined for a period of time. No Speedway means no pay. Riders usually get paid per appearances and per point. However, for riders in British Speedway's leagues, we have the world's only charity for injured Speedway riders. The Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund, or the Ben Fund for short, exists solely to offer support and assistance to Speedway riders who've been severely injured whilst riding for British Speedway teams. Sometimes the support can be short-term, but as we know all too well, lives can be changed permanently as a result of injuries gained in the sport. And sometimes these injuries or other health issues can even present themselves long after a rider has retired. In this episode, we're going to find out more about the Ben Fund. We'll speak to rider Mitchell Davey, whose life was changed in a split second when he was critically injured while riding for Birmingham Brummies 3 years ago. The Ben Fund sprang into action and took away some of the immediate financial worries and helped his recovery. Mitch is repaying that support with a charity bike ride later this year, which we'll also find out more about. And we'll speak with the chairman of the Benevolent Fund, Paul Ackroyd, a former FIM referee who now oversees the charity and ensuring those who need it get the right support as quickly as possible. Plus, we'll speak with a fan doing his bit to raise awareness and funds for the charity. Roddy McDougall is a former TV journalist and executive, and once was head of news at GMTV. He's written a book called No Breaks about the sport, charting the last 12 months when very little happened, but exploring how Speedway can make it big again, with all of his royalties going to the Benevolent Fund. Let's start then with your story, Mitch, because this was a meeting that I actually attended. It was the only time I've been to a Birmingham Brummies meeting, and I was working in Birmingham. I was doing a show on the radio. I finished at 7 o'clock at night, and I got there as soon as I can. I got in late, and I think I got in about the third heat or so. Your crash happened in heat 5, but what was your day like otherwise? Because I think this is the thing with Speedway. You don't know that your life is going to change in an instant as you head into a meeting, that you're not going to be going home in your van with your family. You're going to be going to hospital in a very critical condition as well. Talk us through how that day started, the 9th of May 2018. If you can take us back there, Mitch.
Thanks for having me on the podcast. So it was just a sort of a normal day like any other. I'd raced at Swindon on the Monday night. Had a average evening. It wasn't great. wasn't worst either. I got up the following morning. Took my wife to the airport. Actually had to come back up to Glasgow to go to work. My parents had also just flown in from Australia, so went back. Washed my bike at the place where Nick Morris and Dave Belago kept their bikes. Woke up the following day, loaded the van, set off to Birmingham just because I was staying in the Cotswolds with my parents at the time. Just set off for the meeting like any other day. It was my dad was obviously coming to work for me at the same time. It was a normal day. Only thing being different was I was testing a new clutch setup in the meeting. So that was the only thing I was just looking forward to trying. It'd been something that I'd spoken about with Nick Morris the previous day, and he'd just give me something to try. and yeah, sort of went into the meeting like any other. It was a really nice day. The track was great. Um, had a little bit of dirt on it, but nothing too extravagant. Yeah, had a great first race. Went out and won it, and I set the quickest time of the year in that race, and then was confident going into my next one. And yeah, I made an average start, but got to the first corner in front. It hit a bit of grip, and I knew at the time I wasn't. If I tried to ride it out, I would have sort of buried myself hard into the fence. So just took the option to lay the bike down, and yeah, after that, the first thing I remember is waking up in intensive care with Kev Doolan speaking to me.
It was one of those rare crashes where all four riders go down. And I think you were just the unfortunate party that was at the bottom of the pile. And I think, didn't you get hit by a bike? I think that was what, really gave you the most damage. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's what we think it is anyway. From the pictures we've seen, I've got the video, so I've looked at it all a good amount. But yeah, I think the damage was a bike at the end of the day. But yeah, that's what we looked at it, and it was a proper freak accident. For the first part, I shouldn't have slid off.
It was one of those almost like a first bend bunching situation, because you'd just come out of the tapes. It was the first bend, actually the second turn, where things happened sort of midway round that first corner. And if one of you had gone down, it would have been a completely unremarkable incident. You'd have got up and carried on. What happened was there was a couple of problems with some of the other riders in that particular bend, and one thing led to another, and all four riders went down. All four bikes went into the fence, and unfortunately, you were just at the bottom of all of that.
Yeah, that's what. Like from watching it back, I hit a rut, got grip, laid the bike down. Sam Beebe, who was off gate one, he hit a bit of grip, and it lifted, and he let go of his bike, which took out Josh Bailey and Callum Walker. And it was then, I think, all three bikes met me at the fence, I guess.
It was quite a shocking moment. I've been going to the Speedway for as long as I can remember, and I've never seen an accident quite like it. And I think it was just the silence that fell across the stadium. This huge roar, the first lap, the bikes just come out the starting gate, full revs, and then to nothing, in a couple of seconds. And we could see that one rider was at the bottom of that pile, and I'm not sure we necessarily knew it was you at that moment, but we also saw three other riders get up and walk away, which I know that Sam Beebe, I think, was injured a little in that incident as well. But then the work on you continued. Multiple ambulances and paramedic cars arrived to assist, and you were down on the track for 45 minutes or an hour. And I think anybody who's been to the Speedway knows that if a rider is down for that long, then it's a serious situation that we've got on our hands. And it was a race to save your life on the track that the paramedics were faced with there.
Yeah, that's what, I can never thank the paramedics, enough for what they did. I spoke a lot with them afterwards. But yeah, at the time, obviously, I had no idea what was going on. It wasn't, till a couple of days later when, you started getting filled in on all the small things that had gone on as well.
And I think this was the thing that sticks with me as much was you could just tell the concern on the other riders' faces and, the people who were around. And I think it might have been Leon Flint. And I remember him walking past the stand while the work was going on you, and you could just tell that there was, that this was serious, and this was going to be, whatever happened, this was going to be a life-changing situation for you.
Yeah, that's what Leon and I were really close at the time. Obviously, his first season in the National League and in British Speedway, so. We'd had a really good bond going. And yeah, that's what he said. He said to me, he messaged me afterwards and said, like, I wasn't allowed to scare him like that again. And yeah, that's what, we've I guess we're probably still closer than ever just because of, I guess, that in a way. But yeah, that's what just and then I think Leon was a bit of a hero, like trying to spur the boys on, to lift all their heads, and when the meeting was going to go on, and make sure that they got the win.
Your teammates did rally together, though. 37-34, the final score. The meeting was abandoned because of a time curfew in the end, but the Brummies did rally together to get the results. And there was another accident further on in that meeting as well, with Jordan Jenkins, who was injured, and that was the cause of the meeting being abandoned, but the result did stand. Your injuries were very severe, some large rib injuries. You got a punctured lung. You received injuries to your vertebrae, torn ligaments as well, and also broken a shoulder blade, which experts, according to reports at the time, said was almost impossible to do. It was a long road to recovery, wasn't it? And what were the weeks and the months like after we saw the ambulance disappear from the stadium? Because it was a long road to recovery that you were on there.
Yeah, that's right. It took a lot of time. That's for certain. I spent 2 weeks in hospital in Birmingham, and then was released, allowed to come home, and it was my dad's birthday that he was over here for. So we went out for dinner, and I was struggling at dinner, struggling being able to breathe. So ended up going to the doctors the following day, and ended up having to get my lung drained. And spent another week in hospital up here. And then since then, it was a matter of time, like letting the bones heal first before I could do anything. Starting physio again, getting gradual movement back in my shoulder and my lower back. And at the same time, building up my lung strength again. And that's something that, I still, during the colder months over here, I still struggle with. My lung tightens up. You can constantly feel it, especially if you're out sort of exerting yourself. But that's what it had been a long journey. I got back on a bike at the end of 2018 and went for a ride at Birmingham just to get it out of my system. And at the time, I felt all right on the bike, but I knew I definitely wasn't fit enough to race again. So I took a year off, helped Craig cook, and now I'm getting back to fully fit. Everything feels a bit better. You can do more cardio work and things like that. So yeah, it's a gradual process. But yeah, that's what. I feel now that I'd be fit enough to get back on a bike if I wanted to.
And is that the aim? Are you heading back onto a speedway bike again, or has your life moved on now? Do you think, or what's the long-term plan?
I've still got my bikes. I still look at them. I still say, should I have another go? Should I not? But at the same time, it's been a couple of years. Would I be at the same level I was at? Could I get back to that, or go better than what I was? I don't know. But I sort of look at life with a bit more of a grown-up head now than just, I guess, wanting to race my bikes all the time.
Now, when a major accident occurs, that's when the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund leap into action. And upon hearing about this crash at Birmingham, the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund provided all the support that they could, really, to Mitchell's wife, Donna, and Mitch's wider family. And too, the Speedway community in general got together, and there were collections at the stadiums as well on Mitchell's behalf. Chairman of the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund, Paul Ackroyd, joins us now. Paul, tell us about the work that the Benevolent Fund firstly provided for Mitch after his accident, but also to the wider Speedway community as well, and the kind of work that the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund do, and why people's donations are so valuable.
I mean, Mitchell's case Mitchell is not unique. There have been many others in similar circumstances. to Mitchell. What normally happens following a fairly serious accident is we are alerted through the Speedway network of the promoter or the team manager or something to just say, hey, there's been a really nasty incident, and this is what has happened. So our immediate sort of help line, if you like, is to the partner or wife of that rider, and it's inevitable that they're always 200 or 300 miles away from where the accident is. So, for example, Mitchell was in the Midlands, and his wife or partner was up in Scotland, and so our main aim is to make contact with the partner, and to just make sure that they're okay. They're normally hurtling down the M6 or the M5 or the M4 to some hospital or other, and we need to just organise a little bit of help and make sure that there's a hotel there somewhere near to the hospital where the rider is in, and we need to make sure that they have some money immediately to enable them to survive and get through whatever is going to be thrown at them over the next few days. So we have a kind of a little bit of an emergency plan in place that we're able to do that instantly, and so that is how we operate in such circumstances.
And Mitch, back to you. Tell us about some of the help that you received from the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund, because I know that it was really special to you and really appreciated. But just give us an idea of some of the support that you and your family got.
Yeah, that's what, at the time, you're immediately out of work. All your income has ceased. You've still got bills, and like anyone. And they step in and just relieve that pressure. And the other thing that the Ben Fund done that, probably would never be heard about or noticed would be the support that, Paul himself offered to my wife while she sat by my bedside for 2 weeks down in Birmingham. She was in a strange city, sleeping in a hotel and spending, 12 hours at my bedside every day. And the support and, everything that they offer, it's a full package, and, riders, can't be thankful enough. You never want to obviously have to call upon it, but, when things do go wrong, they're there immediately, no questions asked. They're there for us.
I think maybe what fans perhaps don't realise is, and I've noticed this over the last year or so of doing podcasts in Speedway and speaking to riders, is the amount of expense that a Speedway rider has, not just obviously your day-to-day bills as being a human, a mortgage or car or whatever else, credit cards and all these kind of things, feeding your family, all that kind of stuff that we all have to face is... Firstly, how hand-to-mouth Speedway can be, depending on who you are as a rider, and needing those points. Those points obviously feed your family, but also the cost of Speedway is quite high as well. You've got bills to pay for your engines and all this kind of thing too. So financial worries are a big thing in Speedway.
Oh, massive. That's what it's something that you sort of go through your season and you don't plan anything going wrong. You know how much you got to score to make ends meet and everything like that. So yeah, when it all goes wrong, you're sort of left going, oh God, what happens now? It's a weird situation, but yeah, the expense of being a Speedway rider is probably ridiculous now, and it's so hard. You have to be at the top level, I think, to make money in the sport. For everyone else, it's a meeting to meeting basis, hoping that you clear some profit to make some money.
I think in the previous episode of this podcast series, I spoke to Nikolai Clint, and he worked out that it costs £50 a race for a rider to just turn up. And so obviously if you crash, that's, you need to be successful as a rider to pay that back, even before the takes go up. But, if you crash, obviously you've still got various bills still to pay within the sport as well as everything else.
Yeah, that's it. You crash and you bend a bike, you are, potentially maybe £1,000 down straight up. And the worst thing is, it cannot be your fault. It can be a freak accident or anything like that. I go back to my crash. My body took all the damage. I think the only thing I did was I ripped a grip and broke a front mudguard, and that was it. It was, but on other hands, you could just come together with someone in the first corner. You could be looking at a new forks, new diamond, and new front wheel. If something goes wrong.
And back to you, Paul. Just give us a little bit of a potted history of the Benevolent Fund, because it's been running for quite some time now. Where does it all originate from, and what's the backstory?
Well, firstly, the Ben Fund was formed in around about 1947, 1948. And it was started by a guy called Sir Arthur Elvin, and he was the managing director of Wembley Stadium at the time. So he ran the famous Wembley Lions, and during that period there had been a few fatalities and some very serious accidents, resulting in the riders' families being lost from income, and because in those days the NHS didn't exist. And so he decided, along with a couple of other fellows, that we should have a charity in Speedway to try and help riders who had fallen on hard times. And so the charity was formed with an income of just over £6,000. And over the years, it's kind of evolved from that to where it is today. Times have changed and circumstances have changed, and the level of accidents have changed as well. And so the Benevolent Fund here in the UK, which is the only Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund in the world, I might add, no other country has what we have to offer. And people talk about how good life is in Poland, but they don't have a charity that looks after injured riders like we do. So it's evolved now to where it is today. And we try and look after the paraplegic riders that have been injured racing here in the UK. And we try and look after riders who get fairly seriously injured racing for a British club in a normal season.
You're listening to Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan, and that was the voice of Paul Ackroyd, chairman of the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund. We've also got with us Mitchell Davey, who was a rider who's certainly had their support over the last few years after having an appalling crash back in 2018. We'll hear more from the both of them very soon, including plans for Mitchell to do some fundraising to help repay some of that generosity that's been afforded to him by the Benevolent Fund. We'll hear more about the work of the Benevolent Fund from Paul Ackroyd, and we'll speak to Roddy McDougall, who has recently written a book all about Speedway and how Speedway can get itself big again. We'll hear from him because he's donating all of his proceeds to the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund. So there's the charity angle as well. Still to come on Humans of Speedway.
Have you been to Express lately? People can't get enough of their clothes. They're like instant confidence boosters. The jeans come in a temp control fabric that keeps you comfortable no matter the weather. And the t-shirts, hands down, they'll feel like they're made of the softest fabric you've ever worn. And get this, the suits have stretch and look sharp. Like, what? How do they do that? Everyone's raving about the newest looks from Express. Just check out the 5-star reviews. See for yourself and shop the latest at express.com and in stores.
Welcome back to Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan, and it's a Ben Fun Bonanza in this episode because we're shining the light on a very important organisation within British Speedway, and something that British Speedway is unique in having: its own charity to help those riders who have been struck down by injury in the line of taking part in the sport with a British club. And we're joined by Mitchell Davey, who's already told us about his story and how he ended up needing the help of the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund. We'll hear more from him very soon because he's doing his own charity fundraiser later this year. And we've also got with us Roddy McDougall, who's recently published a new book all about British Speedway, which is raising money for the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund. First, though, back to the chairman of the Benevolent Fund charity, Paul Ackroyd, who himself is a former FIM referee and has overseen many accidents, I'm sure, in his time, which we'll talk more about. But the work that the Ben Fund does is not always reactive straight away to an accident that's just happened yesterday or earlier this week. Some of this work can be required for an ongoing period of time because, unfortunately, some riders do suffer life-changing injuries, and some injuries bring themselves to the fore even long after a rider has retired.
Yeah, what we really find is that riders muddle through their careers and they get the broken legs and the broken arms and collarbones and various other things. But when they stop racing, one of the key things, probably 3 or 4 years after their retirement, is that they have big problems. And one of the key characteristics is like nerve damage. And there are many riders or retired riders today who are still undergoing treatment for injuries that happened 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And they run into problems in dealing with that, both because they can't work or they can't work properly and they don't get the help that they need. And so the Benevolent Fund steps in there and tries to help them as much as we help riders who break a leg or an arm or whatever during a season who can't race for 3 or 4 months. We particularly look after those, but we're finding more and more that riders who have retired and 3 or 4 years down the line, they can't work properly because of injuries occurred by speedway racing.
And do you find now that it's talked about more, riders coming to you with maybe mental health issues as well further down the line? Because particularly when, say, a rider has been used to being involved in the sport and perhaps with injury, their career is ended at short notice, that can be a whole other thing to deal with for them as well, that, the sport they love being a part of has suddenly, vanished.
It very much so. There's no fix for the adrenaline that the riders get when they're racing. And when they have to stop that, a lot of them have a big problem, a big issue with what can they do to substitute that, what they experience racing speedway. And yes, there are several riders who find it very, very difficult. And the mental health side of speedway racing is coming more and more to the forefront over the past few years. And only this year we've helped one particular rider, a retired rider, who has experienced quite a few problems mental health wise, and we've been trying to coordinate and assist him to make sure he gets the right treatment. But there's no fix for the riders once they stop racing, and it's a big deal for a lot of them.
And the last year, of course, has not been great for Speedway, but particularly the Benevolent Fund relying quite largely on bucket collections and events like that to raise money. But your work has still continued. Tell us about how the last year has been for the Benevolent Fund.
Well, we were very lucky because we were the only meeting to take place back in March the 14th.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we can count our blessings very much although the attendance for that meeting was very much affected because people were very worried and they didn't know what was to come from this COVID, this word that we'd heard of but didn't know anything about. And so we were lucky to get our meeting on, which helped enormously with our funds. But obviously, as the year went by, there was no speedway, and so therefore we lost out on our track collections. But having said that, riders weren't getting injured like they would do normally. So as the year went by, we did some fundraising with the BSPA quiz night and various other activities with Kyle Howarth on his cycle ride and Jitendra Duffel on his walk. And so we had money raised from other sources which we wouldn't perhaps ordinarily have had. But at the end of the year, we finished off reasonably okay, despite the fact we didn't have the track collections. The Speedway public were extremely generous during the lockdown period, and they understood that we didn't have an income coming in, and to full credit to everybody, they responded magnificently.
And give us an idea of the costs that are required to keep the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund in business for an average year. What are the sort of figures that you need to raise to keep going?
We need roughly, on average, about £120,000 each year. That's pretty much what we pay out on an average season. We could have a few blips where we have a few more serious accidents, and so therefore we pay a little bit more. But an average would be about £120,000.
And the money that you give to riders, that's there to cover the general cost of living, their bills, or also some rehabilitation costs, medical treatment, or a bit of a mixture of all of those kind of things, the cost that would be associated with an accident?
It's a mixture of all those things. It depends. Every rider it's individual, and every rider has his own personal commitments and various other things. So we look at each case separately and we try and work out what is best for each individual rider, whether it be we plug the mortgage repayments for a period of time, whether his wife needs some assistance, or it's a whole range of things, and we kind of tailor make it to suit each individual rider.
And your involvement in Speedway, you will have overseen a number of crashes through your career being in the referee's box and presiding over these meetings. What was your journey from the referee's box to the Benevolent Fund?
Well, basically, I retired from refereeing, and Bernard Crapper, who was the promoter at Oxford Speedway, and also he was the secretary of the Benevolent Fund. Bernard and I had a few clashes during my refereeing career and his promoting and team managing career. And I'd like to think that Bernard got his own back on me by saying, Paul, would you like to get involved in the Benevolent Fund? It'll only take you a couple of hours a week and you'd better do it very easily. And he quickly persuaded me to get involved, and then I think he went away laughing, saying, I've now got my own back. But Bernard, he was beginning to suffer ill health, and so he needed somebody to replace himself, and I feel very privileged that he considered myself to try and get involved at that point.
As we mentioned, fundraising a key part of any charity, and the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund is no different. One person who's raising some money this year for the Ben Fund is Roddy McDougall. Now, Roddy worked as a journalist for several national news broadcasters, a producer and reporter for BBC News and BBC TV Sport. He moved on to senior roles in news editing with TVAM, GMTV and ITN, and he was head of home news there. And he's written a couple of of books, but his latest is called No Breaks, which looks at a lost season in British Speedway and a story of survival. Roddy joins us now. Roddy, where did your relationship with Speedway come into your life?
Ian, I'm probably very much like you. I'm a fan first and foremost. I've never sat on a speedway bike, and I have huge respect for people like Mitch and all the other riders who do. I mean, for us, it's an entertainment. For them, as you said in your introduction, it can be unfortunately life-changing. I've been a fan. I'm now in London, so it's sometimes quite difficult to actually get out and see live speedway. Obviously, London's certainly not the place it was, but I've always had a love for the sport, and my idea was to write a book and make my royalties available to the Ben Fund, which seemed to be a good thing to do because I think it's a terrific charity, and I think Paul Ackroyd and the trustees do a great job.
And in your book, really, you're covering the change of Speedway, I suppose. Speedway, of course, was a massive sport. Some stadiums had, maybe 40, 50, even more thousand in the 1950s, 1960s and so on. It was the sport after football, really, in this country. But obviously, since then, things have changed, and there's many reasons for that. But that's what the book covers largely, isn't it?
It is. It's a sort of mix of two, really. I mean, it sort of runs from September 2019, so it opens with the sad closure of Stoke and then ends in October 2020 last year. It's amazing how, since I've written it and sort of mentioned it to people, the number of people of my age, and obviously I'm a bit older than you and Mitch, who have said, "Oh, Speedway, is that still going? I used to go to Reading, or I used to go to Ellesmere Port, or I used to go to Boston," and they want to know if it's still on. And I think it's a huge shame that in a large way Speedway has sort of dropped out of national consciousness. And what I wanted to do with the book was basically to do two things. One was to raise some money for the Ben Fund, but also to, in a sense, try, if I could sort of bang the drum for Speedway, sort of beyond the Speedway world, and tell people, look, this is a sport that's still around, and on its day, for me, I think it's the most exciting sport there is.
Speedway, of course, is going through a bit of a change now, I think, with the... it'll be interesting to see how the new TV deal goes with Eurosport, because they're going to be making it free-to-air on Quest as well, with a highlights package. And, of course, they're taking over running the Speedway Grand Prix as well, which I think can only be a positive thing. But I think we are still quite a long way behind those days of, say, the 1950s to the 1970s, when it was, one of the functions to attend through the course of the summer.
Absolutely, and it was interesting, listening to Phil Lanning last week talking about it from a media perspective. I don't work in television or in news anymore, but two ways for me that I think that Speedway could get a boost. The British team last won, I think it was as England, in fact, the last won the World Team Cup in 1989, which is getting on for 32 years ago. Obviously, we all had far bigger things to worry about last year, but I think one of the sad things about the Speedway season was the fact that we didn't get to host the Speedway of Nations at Bellevue. Had it gone ahead at the time, had Ty Woffenden, had Robert Lambert, had Dan Bewley been there, then I think Britain would have stood a really good chance. And I think there is the possibility that it could have got a really good publicity boost from that. The other thing, which I think is important and could again give the sport a boost, you only need to look at the likes of Fallon Sherrock in darts, or Rachel Blackmore in horse racing winning the Grand National, or Shannon Courtney in boxing. If there was a woman or several women who could make an impact in Speedway, again, that's the sort of thing that's new and different and could just give the sport some much needed publicity.
Well, we've certainly got Katie Gordon, and I know there's one or two others in the system as well. So over the years, we'll see how that prediction pans out. This is Humans of Speedway. We're talking about the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund. I'm joined by Paul Ackroyd, the chair of the Ben Fund. That was the voice of Roddy McDougall that you heard there, who's had a long career in media, and he's recently written a book called No Breaks, talking about the fortunes of British Speedway. And Mitchell Davey is also with me as well, who's a a rider who was riding for the Birmingham Brummies at the time of a huge crash that he had in 2018. And he's going to be raising some money for the Ben Fund. He'll tell you about that next here on Humans of Speedway.
The air we breathe, the water we drink, the soil that grows food for our families. These basic elements are essential to healthy, happy lives. America's corn growers think so too. Across the country, they're pitching in every day and doing the work to produce food and fuel that is healthy in a sustainable way. Go to ncga.com to learn more about how corn farmers grow a more sustainable future for us all. That's ncga.com.
Welcome back to Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan, and in this episode we're looking at Speedway's only charity for injured riders, the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund charity, which helps out any rider who's racing for a British club at the time of an accident and requires their support if they're going to be out for a prolonged period of time or suffering from life-changing injuries. And it all relies on fundraising, of course, and a lot of that money comes in through things like the Ben Fund Bonanza meeting that's held every year, bucket collections around stadiums, but also individuals doing their own thing as well. And Mitchell Davey is one of those who's going to be raising money later on this year. He's going to be doing a sponsored bike ride across Scotland, and well, he can tell us all about it in his own words. Mitch, what are you up to? You're back on a bike again, but you're providing the power this time.
Yeah, I've been thinking, since I got injured, how can I repay, the people that helped me out? And, the Ben Fund's one of those at the top of the list. So I'd been thinking, what can I do? How can I do something? Obviously, Lee Kilby done a head shave last year to raise money for the Ben Fund, and I jumped in on that just to try and help. But then at the same time, I was like, I need my own idea. So I was out walking my dogs one day and just decided that, I want to get fit again this summer. I want to, get myself back into a really good shape. So I was like, well, I've ridden for Glasgow, Edinburgh and Berwick. Why don't I cycle from, to all three tracks essentially in a day? And we're doing it on a mountain bike to make it that little bit different and that little bit harder rather than a road cycle perhaps.
Yeah, and you've done some training rides already, and I know you were out at the weekend. How is it feeling being back out on any kind of bike, though?
It's good. It's something that you never lose the love for. It's definitely not as fast as a speedway bike or get the adrenaline going as much, but yeah, being on the mountain bike at the same time, I can have fun. I can do a wheelie, I can do a jump if there's one around. To get a little bit of a buzz, I guess. But yeah, that's what. So far, so good. Training's going all right. We're just gradually building up the miles to make sure the body can make it, and make sure we don't fatigue too much and able to stand up at the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what's the date, and when can people and where can people find out more and sponsor you? Most importantly, because obviously that's the big thing.
Yeah, that's what we're going for the 10th of July, I think it is. The Edinburgh at Berwick that night, so it's a good time. It's all the links are available on all my social media pages like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. But alternatively, the big thing is you can donate directly to the Ben Fund via a text message these days, or via PayPal. For people who don't like using the the fundraising websites. So I think the text number is 70085, and I think you just text SRBF and it donates £5 straight from your account. It's simple and easy to do, and at the end of the day, it all goes to a really worthy cause. Although there was no speedway, they're still paying out to riders who have been, permanently injured and weren't able to return to work. So, their funds are still going out. So, yeah, they needed something because they didn't get all the, the fundraising that they get on a year-to-year basis normally. So, that's what I guess at the time you don't realize how much money is raised by the riders going out and collecting, with the buckets during those meetings. It's huge. And you think about how many tracks are across the UK. It all adds up, and it's funds that the Ben Fund need to support us riders.
And Roddy, for you, you've chosen the Ben Fund to raise money with your book. What was the decision to support the Ben Fund in particular?
I think it's the only, I'm right in saying it's the only Speedway riders charity set up for injured riders like Mitch. To help them. It just sounded like a really, really good cause, and for a sport that's given me a lot of hours of pleasure over the years. As I said, I've always wanted to write about Speedway. It just seemed like the natural thing to do, really. And actually, Paul Ackroyd was one of the first people I contacted, and was, like most people who I spoke to during the course of the book, whether it was Rob Godfrey or Jitendra Duffel or Tom Bacon or Josh Ottey, they were just really happy to give their time, even during 2020 when it was a tough time with the pandemic.
And what's the reaction been so far to the book? Because you've got no reason to hold back in any way or anything like that. I mean, it is a fairly honest account of where Speedway's at the moment.
That's right. Well, Peter Oakes gave it a very nice review in Speedway Star, and I managed to get some coverage in, of all places, The Spectator, yes. Which I think was supposed to be the first time it had ever mentioned Speedway. In a sense, that's what I've been trying to do, and I'm still trying to do it, is just to sort of get people to realise that Speedway is around. Now, obviously you've got to give a fairly realistic position of the sport. You can't go in and say the garden's rosy, but, while sort of talking about how Speedway has declined in popularity over the last 40 years. Hopefully, there was an invitation to click on a YouTube link and watch the Woffenden Lindgren race in October last year. We talked about sport with a heart, and when you compare that with what's been happening with top level football over the last few weeks, Speedway has a great community. When riders are injured, it's not just the Ben Fund collections at the track. It really, really does have a heart.
And Mitch, what's 2021 have in store for you? I think you mentioned that you're going to be working with Craig Cook a little bit, because you say you're still maybe standing away from riding the bike yourself, but you still got a little bit of involvement around the sport now and again.
Yeah, that's it. I got a full-time job now, so I said to Craig, I'm more than happy to help out at sort of, the northern tracks, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Berwick, Newcastle, sort of anything on a weekend. That's my level of involvement at the moment. But, I keep toying with the idea of maybe if there's a individual or something like that, I may stick my hand up for it and have a play again and see how it goes.
You mentioned as well that you have been back on a bike since your accident, just not competitively in the league or in a team meeting, but you have been out there on the bike again.
Yeah, I had a practice last year at Redcar when sort of things opened up a little bit. I hired the track one day. Myself and a whole heap of boys went and had a practice, and I loved it. I put together a small YouTube video. Just sort of showing different angles of a speedway bike, and just tried to, I guess, like Roddy, sort of get people interested, give them something different, to try and raise the profile of the sport. I'd love to make more videos and that, of things people want to see or that, and give them a bit more insight. I think we're in a world full of social media and everything like that now, so to publicize the sport, to get more people coming back through the gate and bums on seats, I guess.
As we say, the danger of the sport is one of its attractions as well, and clearly you probably don't share that view quite so much, but that is one of the attractions for the spectators. But I think for spectators, they have to bear in mind that you are actually humans at the end of the day riding these bikes, and you are quite really putting your life on the line for their entertainment.
Yeah, that's it. But I think that's part of the reason why riders do it at the same time. It's a an adrenaline buzz for us. It's you'll never find anything that replaces the feeling of being on a speedway bike. I guess in a way it's like people skydiving. It's like people if they take it to real extremes, base jumping and things like that. Everyone's got their own thing, but yeah, it's an unbelievable feeling when you're racing a speedway bike, and obviously everything goes to plan, and you might win a race or something that just tops things off.
And for you, Paul, just to round things off, we're on the cusp of a brand new season. Speedway getting back up and running in the UK once again at the time of recording. We're a few days away. But for you, you're ready to leap into action, because unfortunately there will be riders, possibly even riders listening to this, who don't know it yet, but may well need the help of the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund. And when they do, you'll be there.
Yes, indeed. I only said to my wife today, we need to be geared up next week. We start next Monday, and sort of pencil sharpened, and we're ready to kick in as soon as anything untoward happens.
Hopefully nothing untoward will happen, but rarely do we go through a season where that occurs. But my thanks to Paul Ackroyd, the chairman of the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund, to Mitchell Davey, who's going to be raising money for the Ben Fund. After all that support he's had from them, he wants to do something and pay something back. And also my thanks to Roddy McDougall. And you can get your hands on Roddy's book as well, called No Breaks, A Lost Season in British Speedway. It's out now, and the RRP's at $19.99, but you can find it in all good bookstores, and you can get it online as well. So keep your eyes out for that, because it's a good read. And if you'd like to make a donation to the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund, there are plenty of ways that you can do it. As Mitchell mentioned earlier, you can donate by text, probably the easiest way to do it. You can get your phone, type in SRBF, and text to 70085, and that will donate £5 straight away to the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund. You can also donate via PayPal. The details are online at srbf.co.uk, and you can donate by cheque as well. You can even leave a legacy in your will if you wish. All the details online at the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund website, srbf.co.uk, for all the info. And hopefully, as we go through the season, club collections, shared events, all these kind of things that help raise money for the Speedway Riders Benevolent Fund will return, and those funds will continue to increase to do the amazing work that the Ben Fund does. And you've heard just how important it is to every rider, because of course no rider knows when they're going to need the help, and that help from the Ben Fund could be very long lasting indeed, and certainly they will be there for any rider racing for a British club through the course of this and subsequent seasons as well. Don't forget, check out some of our previous episodes. If you're new to Humans of Speedway, there's lots to listen to. Recent episodes include with Nikolai Clint, and in that, of course, we were talking about how he would be racing for Ipswich. Well, that's not happening now, but there's still plenty in there, and he does give an insight into just how much it costs to be an international speedway rider, and perhaps some of those are the factors involved in the decision that's been made there. Who knows? Also spoke to Paco Castagna, and a recent episode too with Bellevue legend Chris Morton. Just a few of the episodes that you should check out. And we are part of the Sports Social Podcast Network, and another podcast that I am proud to host is the official podcast of British Speedway. Lots to check out there, and we're just getting ready for the season as we head through the season. Join us every Tuesday. We'll have all the reaction from the Monday night fixtures. We'll have interviews with some of those involved at those matches on the Monday night, and of course we'll be looking ahead to the upcoming action for the week ahead as well. Don't miss it. Every Tuesday, no breaks, no fear. Part of the Sports Social Podcast Network, and we will see you next time on Humans of Speedway.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network. This podcast is brought to you by Boyle Sports. Build your own bet and choose your own special offer with Bet Builder on the Boyle Sports betting app. Boyle Sports. This is betting. 18 plus, bet responsibly. BeGambleAware.co.uk. This podcast is brought to you by Boyle Sports. Bet on the number of shots on target, assists, tackles, passes and more. All powered by Opta on the Boyle Sports betting app. Boyle Sports. This is betting. 18 plus bet responsibly. BeGambleAware.co.uk.